Yes, so welcome everyone to the channel. And today I have a really interesting and nice guest with me, Rick. He will present himself. As you know, the idea with the channel is to connect with like-minded people, and that was the main idea. Maybe not to grow as fast and become a big YouTuber, just to get to know people who really likes fantasy, like me. So Rick is one of those people. He's been active in the community, on the YouTube community page, for example, giving a lot of really nice and interesting comments. And we met a month ago here on StreamYard, or digitally, and had a discussion. Maybe we can do something together. And here we are we're going to talk about storytelling in fantasy, the overlap between video games and books. And if you've followed my channel recently, you know I've made some videos about that. So welcome, Rick, and
Thank you.
welcome to present yourself a bit as well.
Sure. Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm in Canada right now, and I've always been a big fantasy fan ever since I was a kid. I was not the best reader when I was younger, but I played a lot of games and got into fantasy that way. And then as I got older, became an adult, I started playing more like deeper games like Pillars of Eternity and Elder Scrolls and those sorts of things. And then more recently, in the past 5 or so years, I've really been diving into fantasy books. And that got me to YouTube, to BookTube, and then that's how I found this channel. And I guess just real quick, what I'm reading and playing right now, I just finished a book by Terry Pratchett called Moving Pictures. I'm a big fan of the Discworld, and I'm in the middle of the Gardens of the Moon. I started reading that after watching this channel, and I've been loving that so far. And then in terms of games, right now I'm playing Baldur's Gate 3. I had started playing that, and then I became a father, and that put a halt to a lot of things. And now I'm kind of getting back into gaming and that sort of thing. But
Yeah,
yeah, happy to be here.
yeah, thank you. I mean, this hobby we have is time consuming. We talked about that a bit before we started to record. Long books, long video games, etc.
Hmm.
So you have to take care of yourself and manage your time in a smart way, and take it easy. It's
Yeah.
serious themes always, but we are going to have a few themes for this discussion, and I just want to show you a few things. We're going to talk about video games and books. So here is an example of a video game we might touch upon, The Witcher. And we have, a no-brainer of fantasy book for everyone. It's the Lord of the Rings, and of course we have the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And Rick, you had some Elder Scrolls somewhere.
Yeah, this is kind of an anthology of the Elder Scrolls, which we'll also probably talk about.
And we're gonna have a few themes, and the themes are storytelling in fantasy and video games. That's number one. Then we're going to talk about immersion. Yeah, we will explain more what we mean. We're going to talk about further. We're going to talk about perspectives. From main character, or main character we follow. Is it one main character we follow, or are there many characters we follow? And then we're going to talk about world building and pantheon. So it's a lot of things to talk about. We will see if we manage everything in this session, but we will start at least with that. And you can comment in the field below, of course, or on the community page, or on my Twitter page, or wherever you are. So feel free to join the discussion as well. So I mean, there are many ways to consume fantasy today, and that's video games, board games, books, might be more music, of course. So there are many things. So we will just jump into the discussion and start to talk about storytelling. So, Rick, what are your thoughts about the storytelling and video games and books?
Yeah, it's always interesting to think about how like books versus video games tell stories differently. And we had kind of thought about how stories are told in games and came up with kind of three different examples, at least in kind of more fantasy oriented games, of how stories are told. on on one hand, you have games like Pillars of Eternity or the Elder Scrolls, which are these big open sandbox worlds where there is a main quest, but in a lot of cases, you can completely ignore that and do other things in the world. You can follow all these other stories, which may or may not be connected to that main quest. Elder Scrolls is like Skyrim is a great
Mm.
example of that, where there's all these like other big quest lines that are not tied to that main quest, and so you have this big open world, lots of different stories going on that you can experience. And then you have something like The Witcher, for example, which is also a big open world, but it has a bigger focus, I would say, on that main story. And a lot of the side quests will sort of tie into that main story. Not all of them, but a lot of them will. Um, and on the other extreme, you have kind of very linear games when it comes to story. Something like a Halo game or something where you're playing through these missions, but the story is kind of preset. You don't have a lot of choices in it, but you're still experiencing a really interesting story. So it's kind of cool how you have these different ways to experience a story in video games versus reading a book, which of course there is a lot of variation in how storytelling is done in a book, but it's all similar in that you're reading that story, that set story by written by the author, instead of kind of all these potential different paths you can go, I guess.
Mm. Yeah, and you can't level up in you don't need to level up in a book. I used to say
Yeah,
sometimes when I'm tired of gaming because it's maybe too difficult, and I start to read books
right.
instead. Because yeah, I think there are many interesting perspectives that you bring up. I think the book has, since it has this decided story. I mean, it's
Mhm.
we cannot affect the story,
Right.
but we can do that usually in a video game. It depends on the video game itself.
Yeah, so like there's a lot of games that have multiple endings, for instance, and multiple conclusions to main quests or side quests. So that way, it's a set story, but there's maybe 30 different set stories within that game because depending on your decisions along the way, you'll get to one possible conclusion, and so you have a bit more of that, I guess, choose your own adventure sort of thing. Whereas in a book, you're reading exactly what like the author intended you to read.
Mm,
Which I mean, I guess you're doing in a game too, but you have more options, I guess.
mm.
Um, yeah.
And I think there are books with the like Malazan Book of the Fallen, which has many
Yes.
plot lines and
Yeah.
characters. And Malazan is interesting because they role played it from the beginning. It was a
Hmm.
TTRPG from the start. So I think that's maybe affects how they are writing, both Steven Erikson and Ian Esselmont. But I'm not sure about the like the quality of. I mean, we can talk about the quality in both video games and books. Can you say that, or we can just think out loud? Is there any difference, or on quality, if you have focus on one main character versus many characters, is the either better or worse?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I think in general, when you look at storytelling quality, in a book, that is the focus. That is like it's about telling a story. Whereas in games, you've got the story, but you've got the visuals, you've got the gameplay. There's a lot of other things, and so there are some games where the story doesn't matter at all. It's just there because it needs to have something, but really the thing it's emphasizing is the gameplay.
Hmm.
So you do get like some dramatic variation in quality. I mean, you can get dramatic variation in book storytelling quality, but like all the good books are great, stories.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but yeah, like it is interesting how in most games you're only experiencing the world through the character that you're playing. And so it's usually just one character. I mean, or maybe you have like a party, but
Mm.
even still, you're mostly experiencing through that one main character. Whereas in a book, like especially Malazan,
Mm.
you're experiencing the world through many, many characters.
Mm.
Even Lord of the Rings, you're experiencing that through several different characters, and you're kind of in the shoes of those characters, like you are in a game, but you're in multiple different perspectives, and so it is quite different in that regard. And I think there are some games that have tried that, but I think that's something that you can do in a book that's very difficult to do in a game.
Yeah, yeah, you can't choose not to throw the ring into Mount Doom, for example, but you could do that in a video game, so you can
Yeah.
have the choice. I'm playing Witcher at the moment. I'm just started.
Mhm.
I'm at the just visited the Blood Baron, so I'm obviously very early in the game,
Cool,
extremely
cool.
early.
Yeah.
And then I'm replaying Pillars of Eternity, which I'm more accustomed to, and as you are as well. But it struck me that in The Witcher, I'm still having some. I'm trying to adjust to Geralt. He's a
Mm,
he's a kind of skeptical guy, and so he doesn't
right.
seem to enjoy his adventure. He's a bit skeptical. So I'm trying to get used with the main character a little bit, and then so far it's very you are very tied to the written story, so you
Yeah.
just follow that. While in Pillars, where I'm in the beginning of the game, in the city called Defiance Bay, where I can do practically whatever I want, and I can choose to kill people or not kill them. So
Right. Yeah, and that's another interesting difference between a game like a Pillars or like a Skyrim versus The Witcher is in Pillars you're making your own character and you role play that character however you want. Like in one of your most recent videos, you were talking about picking classes and backgrounds and like you can really style that character exactly how you kind of want to play. Whereas in The Witcher, like you have some ability to role play. You can play Geralt in slightly different ways, or
mm,
even like fairly different ways, but you're always playing Geralt. And he has a set history, a set background. And if you played the previous Witcher games, you can actually draw that background into Witcher 3, for example. So it is really different in that regard because you're not a blank slate, you're a predetermined character, and if you're like me and you read all the books before you played Witcher 3, you have
mm.
all of this history of who that character is. And I remember when I played that game, I very much tried to role play Geralt as I knew him from like the books and that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. Mm.
So that is like a really different kind of storytelling within a video game that um, yeah, like it does seem to tie more into like playing a book in some ways.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting that some video games have started as books, like Geralt. So I haven't read them yet. I just explored a YouTube video on
Yeah.
the books this a few days ago. Um, I'm also playing Mass Effect at the moment. I don't know if you have played that game.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, I'm a really slow guy, so I'm playing Skyrim first time last year now, Mass Effect. So, and I'm
That's
probably in
fair.
the end of the game with Mass Effects. I've been playing it today
Okay.
a lot, and the story there is also fixed in a way. I mean, it's always moving very quickly forward. It pushes you
Mhm.
forward very quickly, but you can make. I haven't done it. I'm kind of good guy. I'm playing at the
Yeah.
moment, but you can make really bad decisions if you want
Yeah.
to. Also, not only kill people. I'm only talking about killing people today so far, but you can be illoyal, and you can
Yeah.
be very sarcastic and ironic and things like that. So I think that's interesting that you can have that kind of a dynamic in a video game,
Mhm.
and maybe not so much with books, unless you maybe discuss things with your readers, I suppose, when you're continuing
Right.
to write story.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the Mass Effect games. That's an incredible story, and it is one where like there is some linearity to it. You do have like key decision moments that can change certain endings or how certain what happens to certain characters. So there is some of that, but it's not the like completely open-ended world like a Skyrim or something. But it's such an incredible story between those three games, and it is kind of an interesting thing, like a difference between reading a book and playing a game and how you're kind of experiencing that story because I don't necessarily like the word, but in some ways when you're reading, it's kind of more passive, whereas when you're gaming, it's more active. And that's not a negative thing about reading,
Mm,
because I
mm.
love reading as well. But like you're playing that character going through the story versus reading about a character going through that story. So it's just different how you interact with that story between the two. And I think they're both amazing and really great ways to experience a story, but it is cool to think about those differences.
Yeah. And I think maybe, at least for me, depending on my mood, I prefer to read or play a game. It depends on what I want to
Totally.
do. Sometimes how active I want to be. In a way, it's, as you say, it's more passive to read. Yeah, so I was playing Mass Effect yesterday, and I become, content and happy where I was, and
Hmm.
wanted to take a break. And then because I'm alone at the moment here in the house, so then I started to read a book instead. So
Hmm.
just to get everything served for me instead.
Yeah.
So you could say, um,
But but like even though one is maybe more passive in how you consume it, they can both still trigger all sorts of like emotions within you. You can laugh from a game and a book. You can cry. You can get super stressed. Like
mm,
I know I'm definitely one of those readers where when there's like a really tense moment in a book, I almost start speed reading because I'm like, oh, I got to figure out what's happening
mm,
next. And
mm.
you can also get that in a game where there's this really intense moment and you're fighting some epic creature and like you just like get really stressed because you want to get through it, you want to beat it, you want to overcome it. So even though you consume them in different ways, they can still trigger all of the same intense emotions in the same way, which is really cool.
Yeah, and you can disagree with the decisions of the
Hmm.
Hadrian Marlowe in The Sun Eater, which I'm reading now. I don't want to
Hmm.
spoil anything, but he really is provocative to the reader. It can be, it depends on you as a reader, but I suppose many people can think it's a bit provocative. I was doing I have a notebook here, so I'm doing like this. There's not so much to read. Maybe like this, yes. So I'm writing down. So
Cool.
this is the heritage of me being a small boy. I'm still trying to honor it. So when I read Lord of the Rings, so I'm trying to follow the story in Pillars of Eternity, and then I
Hmm.
went through the descriptions of the quests.
Right.
Um, Now on my rerun of the game, and I realized that the way of writing the quests were very repetitive, supposedly so they won't lose the player
Hmm.
during the game. But I thought that was interesting because it's like a background or prologue, like in a book, and then you have certain quests for different characters, and then the quest is repeated, which is not so common. I mean, it can happen in the book, I suppose, but maybe not so often because if you've said it once, maybe you won't repeat it. Not in that way you repeat quests in
Right.
a CRPG, for example.
Yeah, that's true because there can be a lot of differences in the structure of those sorts of things in a game versus in a book. And I remember I think in books there can be maybe a lot more subtlety to repeating something but in a different way so that it stays fresh in your head but it doesn't feel like it's being repeated to you. um, there was a series I finished recently where the Rayura Revelations by Michael J. Sullivan, where he intersperses this one like mythological story about this one of the gods in the world multiple times throughout the story, but it's in a kind of a different way each time, and so it never feels repetitive. And then you get this really cool payoff from that at the end, which I won't spoil.
Mm.
Um, but it's just kind of cool how that he like sprinkled it carefully in, and it wasn't like in your face obvious, um, and just had this really awesome moment at the end. And sometimes you do get that in video games where things are kind of left like breadcrumbs along the way. But I think there's also a lot of cases where, like you said, it's a lot more, I guess, obvious or intentional because it's trying to make sure that the player remembers these particular things and is drawn along in that way, I guess, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think the if you would write a book like a video game, especially the CRPGs,
Hmm.
the isometric. For those who don't know, have the power to control a party of adventurers, and you are a main character. Baldur's Gate 3 is the most easy example nowadays, I think, and we talk about Pillars of Eternity here. But if you would write a book, in that way it become very difficult for the reader to follow. Even more
Hmm.
difficult, we didn't talk about it before we recorded, but I think we can both talk about that because we're in that too, the TTRPG uh,
Yeah,
genre. I have the Pathfinder, you had some of yours.
got my Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, great. And I mean, it was a while since I was a game master, but I have friends who play. We can start to play this autumn. But then my friends, they could come up with all wild kinds of ideas to that I had to relate to and try to make a good story of.
Yeah.
So then it was totally non-scripted. You could say.
Yeah, I think TTRPGs are some of the most dynamic storytelling you could ever experience because, as like a game master, you're laying a foundation. You've created a world or you're using a pre-existing world and you have a it's almost like laying down train tracks for the story,
Mm,
but that doesn't mean the party's going to follow that train track at all, and
yeah.
they have the full freedom to do that. So like in a
Mm,
video game, you have a set number of choices because those choices are written into the game,
mm,
but in a TTRPG it's 100% freedom. And it's really cool because it's kind of like communal storytelling. You're telling a story with your friends and you're doing it all together, which
mm.
is it's such a really unique and interesting way to tell stories. But it can also be really difficult because you have to be potentially good at thinking on your feet, and
Mhm.
if you're one of your players does a completely off the wall thing, and you're like, oh god, now I need to like build this whole other thing because he stole this item or something. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Mm. I have a friend, childhood friend. We were role playing a lot, tabletop role playing, and we were small then, but
Mhm.
he killed the one of the main character, or the main characters, one of the enemies. He was not supposed to do that. They were caught and put in prison, but he did that. And we couldn't understand why. We were five people playing,
Mhm.
but the reason was because there were a girl outside in the area which he was interested in, and she was outside. So he wanted to try to, kill himself, and so he could quit and go out
Oh,
to meet the girl instead. It
that's
was funny
so
for me.
funny.
So, but it
Nice.
created a lot of headache for me as a game master. That you don't
I'm
need to worry
sure.
about in a book or in a video
Right.
game, of course, for the
Yeah.
John Sawyer, who's made the Pillars of Eternity, for example. You don't
Right.
need to
Yeah.
bother about
Yeah.
things like that. I think we can continue a little bit to immersion.
Sure.
And when we planned this discussion, we thought about, there are different ways to experience books and video games. I won't spoil that, so I will just throw that to you,
Sure.
Rick, to elaborate a bit upon.
Yeah, and this in some ways can be like the biggest difference between the two media is with a book, you're reading text and you're reading descriptions, and then you are trying to imagine what you're seeing or like what the book is describing. You're imagining what is being heard in the story. You're using your imagination to trigger all of your senses based on the descriptions in the book. Whereas in a game, it's all audiovisual. You're seeing things, you're hearing things, and it's not necessarily up to your imagination to craft all of that stuff because it's been done for you. And so it's two very different ways to get immersed because in a game, you can get really immersed by what you're seeing and what you're listening to because it can be really the sounds can be super lifelike, very natural, or the visuals can be really impressive, and it can draw you in that way. Whereas the way a book immerses you is through how it engages your imagination. And I know from listening to various authors, they always talk about making sure you try to engage all five senses. So you're not just relying on visuals and sounds, but you're also doing smells and touches and tastes and all of that kind of stuff.
Mm.
Which is yeah, it's like such a cool, different way to become immersed in something.
Yeah, I think the ways. I mean, now we have the VR as well, by the way. So when it comes to
Yeah, there's
games,
also
which is
that.
another level. But um, I think in the books we start. We can. I mean, if we read one book, you and me, we will have different ways to perceive how everything looks. So your Middle Earth
Totally.
looks different to mine, at least before the movies, for
Right.
example.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big thing. On the other hand, you can really feel a lot of things when you play video games as well, but everything is given to you. In
Yeah.
that sense, everything is served to you when it comes to video games.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
like with storytelling, it's the other way around, I think.
yeah, it kind of switches that whole active versus passive thing because in video games you're passively being immersed, I guess, because it's through what you're seeing and hearing. Whereas in a book, you're very actively having to imagine all of these things yourself. And yeah, you're totally right. Like we can have 300 people read a book and we can have 300 different mental images of a given character in that. But in a video game, you have one like image of a given character
Hmm.
because that is what is there.
Yeah, and like Geralt is Geralt. He looks like that. He can not look in any other way. If you read the books, of course, if you did
Right.
that in the beginning, you had your own picture of how he looked and all the characters in there as well. But
Hmm.
I remember with Lord of the Rings, with when the movies came, I was of course happy because the movies were great. I think they are still very good, but also a little sad because I had my picture of Gandalf and Sam Rivendell, all the especially the places. I think all
Right.
the places.
Yeah, and I know that that can be a big thing when a book is adapted into a movie. If it doesn't match people's mental images based on the descriptions or based on their imagination, it can be really disruptive to them. Um, and sometimes that can just make people not want to consume the game or the movie that it's adapted from.
Hmm. I'm turning some pages here in the Lord of the Rings book because see if I can find it. It was a long time since I here maybe. Yeah. At least there is when they come into Moria. I
Right.
suppose if you're watching this, you know Lord of the Rings. So and the Casa Doom, there is a what do you say? It's sound.
Illustration.
No, it's with text when they start to drum in the deep
Oh yeah, yeah,
of
yeah,
the
yeah.
night when I think it's
Hmm.
Peregrine who
Yeah.
put something into to the well, I think by
Hmm.
mistake. And it's all these boom sounds, I think it is. So you can
Hmm.
really feel the sounds in the book as well. It's written. I think it's I don't know what it's called in English. There's some Swedish word for that when you when you express sounds in text.
Oh
I don't know
yeah.
what it is.
I know what you're talking about, but I can't think of the word off the top of my head.
But when I read that when I was small, I really felt the drums, and I have
Hmm.
a good friend, David. He talked about that just a year ago when we met, and that he has a strong feeling for that passage in Lord of the Rings, and then yeah, I think the movie matched that
Hmm.
well, but still you can really everyone has their own drum sounds, I suppose,
Yeah.
from the Lord of the Rings. So.
Hmm. Yeah, and one of the things I find interesting about books when it comes to descriptions and imagining things is different authors provide different levels of description. Some might just very briefly describe something, and so it leaves a lot of room for people to interpret it differently. Whereas some get really heavy into the descriptions, and so it can really help guide that person to form a very specific mental image.
Hmm.
Um, and I find when I'm reading, I think I tend to prefer when things are more fully described because it helps me craft that mental image. Whereas if there's not a lot of that description, um, sometimes I'll even like try to look up art from that book to try to
Mm.
help me visualize what a given character looks like.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah. So I find like the level of description in a book can really play a big role in how immersed I get in that story or world.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting how they are interconnected, the games and the books.
Mhm.
A totally different game is No Man's Sky or Starfield. People probably know about them. Science fiction games, by the way. And since I'm reading Sun Eater at the moment, I'm not so used to sci-fi at all. It's a good way to get an idea of how space can look like, or
Mhm.
traveling between planets, or if you're into haven't read so much fantasy, maybe it helps, as you say, to watch movies
Right.
or video games to get the feeling of it, I think.
Yeah, it can help you with some of these maybe more complex ideas like space travel. Seeing it in a game or in a movie can maybe help you better visualize it when you're reading a story because some of those things can be really, really hard to describe.
Mm.
Um, and maybe it helps you just better immerse yourself in a given story depending on how well it's described or something like that. Yeah.
And I think magic is such a thing if you don't know how it looks like. But then I'm thinking about Malazan, and
Mhm.
I think uh, I think maybe Steven said that on the interview here. At least Ian C. Esselmont said that um, if you describe magic, in detail, it's not magic anymore. So there is a
Yeah.
room for being mysterious in
Right.
fantasy when you describe things, for example.
I do find though in so far in my reading of Malazan, I'm still only in the first book, but I find that the way he describes the Warrens and the magic that's being done, it does provide enough description that I could very easily picture what's happening. And especially when people are traveling in the Warrens, I think he does a really good job of describing that space in the Warrens, which is very it's very evocative of specific images, which I think is really cool.
Mm. Yeah, I think especially later, if you would read Ian C. Esselmont, they use the Warrens, or they describe the Warrens not differently, but from different perspectives. So it's more of
Oh,
a,
cool.
yeah, it's more of I think Ian C. Esselmont uses the senses more than Erickson does when he describes the Warrens. It's not totally accurate because Erickson does a lot during his 10 books, with the
Mhm.
Warrens, but very broadly, you could say that, I think.
Yeah.
But that's the thing with the in the video games, like Baldur's Gate. We can talk about that since you've started that. It's
Yeah.
if you use magic, it's very detailed. I mean, you can
Yes.
really understand that through mathematics, I suppose. I haven't done that myself, but in contrast to books where magic can be mysterious, it's actually not so magic in role-playing games on a computer, at least.
Yeah, because in video games there are rules because that's how the games function.
Mm,
And so yeah, it can like you can still have this kind of mystical element to it, but there are very set rules. Like you cast a fireball and it does this specific animation, and then it hits the enemy and it does X amount of damage, and like that's
mm,
kind of a spelled out thing. Whereas in books, depending on the author, I mean, there are some authors now that, like Brandon Sanderson, who write
mm,
very specific rules to their magic system.
mm.
Um, but then there are other authors like Tolkien or like um, Malazan and all of that, where the magic is not super specifically defined, and you can do all kinds of crazy things with it. So there are less rules or limitations to what that magic can do. And you can't really do that in a video game because it is a game and it's
Hmm.
part of the gameplay elements.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a thing. That's something for myself, since one of my lenses are spirituality. I still think you can find that in video games as well if you want to. But you can also be very technical on how you approach the games. Maybe it's more difficult to do that with books if you're not interested in, of course, in the writing techniques
Right.
itself, of course, because that can, make it less magical, I suppose. I think writing is one of the few magic things we have left because humans can create stories, and that's a wonderful thing, I think, to
Mhm.
all the fantasies imagination that exists in human minds. So,
Right. Yeah, and I think it can be easier like going thinking about like the technical things and like writing versus a video game and tying that to immersion. In some ways, it can be a lot easier to be torn out of your immersion in a video game compared to a book. I mean, if you're reading a book and suddenly there's like a paragraph that's really poorly written, yeah, that can tear you out of your immersion. But that's not usually like that's a rare thing, I would think, because usually writing styles are pretty consistent within a book. So
mm,
when you're immersed, you're generally immersed. Whereas in a game, if there's some weird animation or the game crashes or there's a bug of some kind, it
mhm,
can very quickly pull you out of that and you don't
mm,
have to worry about that as much in a book. So that's kind of an interesting,
yeah.
maybe negative for video games with immersion is it you can be disrupted from that, I think, a little more easily.
Yeah, and I think a book obviously cannot be what do you say? If we look at video games from beginning of 2000s, nowadays we say it's old graphics and etc. A
Hmm.
book is a book. It's the same even if it
Right.
was from the 1600s or
Yeah.
nowadays. I think that's a funny thing to mention.
Yeah.
Just a thing to the viewers. I forgot the mic because as you know, if you follow the channel, I record at different places because I'm alone at the moment, as I said, here at home. So I don't have the mic here, but I hope you hear me. If it's okay for you, Rick, I will just go and fetch the mic. It
Sure.
takes 1 minute. So, and I think if you're still here as a viewer, you have no problem for waiting a minute. You can take a cup of tea or something. So that's the memory. I forgot the mic.
And hopefully my sound and everything is coming through okay too.
Actually, I made the interviews with Ericsson and
Hmm.
others without microphone. It went obviously well, but then I think it was a few comments, which was good on my channel, that the sound was so and so. So I bought a mic for that, and now I forgot it, but now it's here.
Fair
So I
enough.
hope you hear me well now, even better if you didn't hear me so much before. Yeah, one thing about immersion is the perspective. I was, like in Skyrim, you can have a first
Mhm.
person perspective, right? So
Yep.
it's like you are seeing it all, or VRR nowadays. I haven't
Yeah.
tried that. It sounds scary to me, but maybe
Yeah,
it
I
will
haven't tried it either.
be. But in the book, you usually have the perspective from different persons, so that's a big difference when it comes to maybe even storytelling, but also immersion. So we didn't
Mhm.
talk about that before, but I don't know if you have reflected upon that. So,
Yeah, yeah, because I mean, like I know in storytelling there's always talk of like the three kind of main ways that you can narrate something. You can narrate it from first person, second person, or third person. It seems like a lot of things tend to be more third person. Um, And when you do that kind of third person narration style, you can view the world through many, many different characters if you want. Or at like a chapter can be all based on one character's point of view. I know a lot of books will do that. The Game of Thrones, George R. R. Martin comes to mind with that. Or like in Malazan, where each chapter, like you can between paragraphs switch whose perspective you're viewing the world through. Where yeah, in a game you're mostly experiencing it through one character or maybe like a cast of characters, because you do have kind of different almost like different narration styles. You've got first person, where you are looking through the eyes of that character and you usually see your hands up and that sort of thing. Third person, where you're kind of looking maybe over their shoulder. You can do that in Skyrim, or like Mass Effect is like that. Or like the isometric kind of style, where you're looking down on things like in Baldur's Gate or Pillars of Eternity, and you're almost that one is, I guess, more like that third person narration style in books, where you're this like view beyond the characters, even though you're still playing a character, but in that sense, like you can play a party, but you're still mostly experiencing the world through the main character, because your party members interact with you as a character. So even that, you're still mostly one character, versus books where you can experience the world through very many different characters.
I just thought of an exception. It was your advice to try to read N.K. Jemisin's. I've started the Broken Earth trilogy, and that is in second person, you being the main character so far.
Yeah, that
So far
one's
I've read so far.
it's really interesting. And because in the first book, it's following, if I remember correctly, 3 different stories, and I think 2 of them are told in mostly third person, but the present time one, the like main story, I guess, is told in second person. And I know that a lot of people get really thrown off by that and don't end up liking that series because it's such a different narration style. But yeah, it was so interesting, because it's like being told what that character is doing as they're doing it.
Yeah, and I think in the beginning of the book, she writes, Jemisin, that now this is you, the main character, at least the main character so far. This is you. Remember that this is you, and then it describes as you are touching things, or you are opening doors, or you are touching, and so on. So it's interesting.
It is a very interesting. Like I really enjoyed that series because of that unique perspective that the narration style gave. Because I haven't read too many like second person stories.
No, I don't. I'm not sure I can. I cannot tell you any examples of second person books. Maybe some of you watching this can, then you can write it in the comments, of course, if you have advice on good books with a second person perspective. So we have covered a lot on immersion. Have we missed something?
No, I don't think so.
We can continue, I think, to world building, and that includes a lot of things. It can be everything, but the Pantheon, it can be the geography itself, the maps, and so on. So Rick, you can choose where we start.
Sure. I mean, I think in general, it's interesting because there's a lot of similarities in world building between a book and a game, a fantasy game, but there are some, I think, interesting differences. But in both cases, you're the author or the game designers. They built this world that has flora and fauna. It's got gods. It's got geography. It's got all that kind of stuff. And same with like a tabletop RPG. Like you're building this place so that people can interact with it. The story can interact with it. The characters can interact with it. I think one thing that's potentially different between the two is that in a book, most, if not all, of the world building is generally serving the story or the plot in some way. Um, Whereas in a game, you can have a lot of side world building content that a player might not ever interact with if they're just focusing on a quest line or a main story or something like that. But if you're, the kind of player that really likes to explore an area, you can, read all the different books that are in a game that have nothing to do with any of the current stories, but it's all this extra flavor and world building that kind of makes that world feel deeper. Um, that doesn't serve the plot or anything like that at all. And I think they don't do that in books because that can make a book be hard to follow. It can make it feel overly long and that sort of thing. But that's why like some worlds like Lord of the Rings has all these companion books about all these other aspects of the world, or George R. R. Martin has kind of a history of his world kind of book. So there are ways to do that in books, but it's usually for like a separate thing rather than in the book itself, or an appendix or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's and I think that comes to when you're playing a video game, you have a choice, following the main story or doing side quests. Usually, you have that, and you can do both, of course. In a book, you can choose the side quests. At least there is this lit RPG. I'm not sure if I understand that correctly, but at least when I was small, it was that you can make choices, but still it was very limited in what
Right.
you did then. Now it's probably more advanced. So if someone knows it here, you can comment on that as well, of course.
Yeah, I know that like kind of choose your own adventure books where it's like, turn to page X if you've made this decision, or turn to page Y if you made that decision. Um, yeah, I don't have a whole lot of experience with the modern kind of lit RPG genre where they kind of gamify certain elements or they take video game elements or tabletop elements and put them in a book, and they turn that into like the story itself. But I don't have a lot of experience with that, unfortunately.
But in a video game, if you're really interested in, I don't know, exploring some ruins that are not part of the main plot, you probably can do that, and there
Right.
probably is a story connected, and the storyline and the quest line to that. And in the of course in the book, it's maybe some authors do that, but they will probably be criticized because they're not, they are not focused on the story. It's difficult to follow characters or plot lines, etc. So yeah, you can do it in the book, but it's more risky.
Yeah, and I think like one way that book authors do that is like they might have their main book series, and then they'll have like a short story or a novella or maybe a side series where they'll explore those other ideas. I know like Christopher Rocchio kind of has his main novels, and then he's got novellas that maybe take place in between. And I think that's almost the I think that's probably one of the better ways in which an author can kind of, do some of that side content that in a way that like a video game does.
Yeah, and especially in Lord of the Rings, you have all the things with languages. You can at
Yeah.
least learn some Elvish, for example.
Right.
I don't know what it's called in English, but the ring of the world. It's called in Swedish, but probably not. I have to look it up.
Like the History of Middle Earth book or the
No,
Silmarillion?
it is, but it's focused on the languages.
I see. I see.
And
Yeah, I mean,
it's
people can become fluent in Elvish because he fleshed that language out so fully. But you don't need that to read the story.
right. Now
Yeah,
I only
that's
find
a cool
the
example.
Swedish title. Yeah, so you can find alphabets in there and pronunciations and so on, and you also find that in not so much in Malazan, but you find it in other fantasy, of course. In Malazan, it's more focused on tribes, history, geography, rituals. So far, I mean, I don't know what your impression is when it comes to world building there.
Yeah, I mean, so far Malazan feels like a really deep, well-built world, and like it'll kind of have snippets of information here and there, and then maybe build on some of that later. And I think that's a really cool way authors can do that, kind of building that depth to world building. Um, and like I think Lord of the Rings is a really great example of having a lot of extra world building, both in the main story but also outside of it, because they have all these songs and these stories within the story that the characters tell that does do a lot of that extra world building that you might not see in other stories. But then the Lord of the Rings, of course, has these incredible appendices that have
Mm,
all this other history and information and like whole different stories, like this whole background on Aragorn and what he did before the story and all that.
mm,
Um, and that is sort of similar to then like a side quest in a video game, where you do get all that extra content. It's just in the appendices.
mm,
And another thing I've seen some books do, which I actually think is really cool, is have like footnotes.
mm,
Terry Pratchett has a lot of that, where you're reading something and it might mention something and it doesn't explain it in the text, but there's a footnote, and in the footnote it explains what that thing is. So that could be an interesting way. It'd be cool to see more of that. I think
mhm,
that does allow for some of that like non-serving the plot world building that
mhm,
people love, but doesn't detract from the story itself because you can skip it or go back to it
mm,
because it's in a separate text, like a
mm.
footnote or an appendix.
Yeah, I mean, for me, lore or world building is, I mean, I don't know what I would do without lore. It's great to delve into it and to learn more and to explore more and to especially for
Mhm.
rereads. I think the lore is really good, especially as we talked about immersion. I mean, lore is both in video games and books are great for, you
Yeah.
coming back or you feeling more or you learn more about that. One other thing I think with world building is maps.
Yep.
In itself, you had a map there. How did
Yeah.
you?
Yeah. I have a map. This is a map of the Elder Scrolls world. Kind of back up a bit so that it shows the whole thing. This is Tamriel.
Mhm.
And so each of the main games take place on like a different province of the world. But yeah, that's a big similarity I think between a lot of books and games is they have maps and they have
Mhm.
detailed maps and they have all these places on the maps. And in the games you can go and visit them as a character, and in the books you're often exploring them through the story.
Yeah, and you can't in the books you can't like in Malasan, I can't go to the north of Jennabakis if not Stephen Erickson wants us to go there, for example.
Yeah,
But we can do that in Skyrim, for example. I can go
right.
everywhere in the country or the region.
Hmm.
So that's interesting too, I think. Maps are central, but you can maybe it's more you have more possibilities in a video game with maps than in a book in a way.
Yeah, if it is a game like Skyrim or Pillars of Eternity or The Witcher, for instance, where
Mm,
when they create a map in the game that's a kind of open world game, then the player will expect that they can go visit anywhere on that map.
mm,
And so then the game designers have to build out that whole map.
mm,
Um, so in some ways that can make a lot of extra work for them.
mhm,
But if done well, it's just really cool because you can just be like, I'm going to go explore that mountain, or I'm going to go explore that ruin, and
mm.
you can create your own story doing that yourself. Um, and it's yeah, it's that kind of actively experiencing the story kind of
Mm.
situation.
I have some board games here just beside me. I can show uh, because it's from Elder Scrolls. So this is
Oh
from
right.
this is from the Elder Scrolls board game.
Mhm.
Oh, like this,
Oh cool.
and this is the map. So here you also have a map, and you can go between all these places, and then you have a book, which I think this is the correct. Yes. So then this is very, elementary compared to a book and a video game. But here is a place called Elden Root somewhere.
Oh, cool.
And then it description of the place or the city or the village and what you can find in the village, what you can
Hmm.
learn in the village, and what quests to find. So it's interesting to see this. Uh, the maps are very central, of course, for world building, but they are used very differently in the different forms of fantasy, you can say.
Yeah.
But for me, maps, I have a friend still, Peter, and we when we were small, we we drew maps together,
Oh, cool.
fantasy maps, and our own. So it's really something for the imagination. I think it's become very nostalgic when I see a fantasy map because you can put a lot of hopes and dreams into these maps as well. So
Hmm.
what I think is also central when it comes to world building is the pantheon
Hmm.
and how that is described and used and the differences between video games and books. Now it's interesting, I think, because you're reading Malazan at the moment, and then you have played so much Pillars of Eternity that you're very well versed in that game. And I don't know if you see any. Maybe it's too early. I don't know with Malazan, but maybe it's interesting to hear your thoughts on the pantheon because pantheons are usually important in fantasy.
Yeah, I definitely do see similarities between them in, and like I won't spoil anything with Pillars because there are some really cool things that happen with the Pantheon there, but like how the gods interact with mortals in Pillars versus what I'm reading so far in Malazan, I do see a lot of similarities in how the gods are not these perfect beings either. They have all of these flaws. They have things that they really focus on, and um, seeing like the motivations of like Shadow Throne in Malazan, for instance, so far where I am,
Mm,
or Opon, and how they interact with the mortals versus like how the different gods in like Barith and Aothas, how they interact
mm,
with the mortals in Pillars. Like I do see a lot of those kind of parallels, and it's really cool. I really like those kinds of pantheons where there is a lot of interaction between the gods and mortals, and how the gods are super flawed and have like very specific things that they're interested in. I like that's the kind of pantheon and world building I really enjoy.
mm. Yeah, I think. Um, it makes it deeper and it makes it more entertaining, I think, for the
Yeah,
reader.
yeah,
And in books, I think it ties into mythology in books because the Odyssey and the Iliad and all the
yeah.
epics. Of course, they have the similar things with similar themes.
Hmm.
And in video games, I'm thinking about another video game now, and that's Pathfinder. I don't know if you
Yeah,
played Wrath of the
yeah.
Dragons. Yeah,
Yeah, I played part of that, and I played all of Kingmaker.
yeah, right. And then you have the maybe a small spoiler, but or a big spoiler, I'm not sure. You can if we put it vague, you can come in contact with the divine in a very uh, clear way. You can
Hmm.
take part of the different divine paths. So there is
Right.
this connection to gods, and that you can act and you can actually play uh, part of them at least.
Yeah, yeah. It's very different than say a world where the gods are more hands off and distant and don't have necessarily like really direct influences on the world, or it's all through like dreams or something like that. I
Mm,
think an interesting comparison is if you look at the Elder Scrolls world, you've got kind of two main sets of gods. You've got the Daedra, which are very much like the Malazan gods or the Pillars of Eternity gods, but they are interacting with mortals all the time, mostly in negative ways, but not always,
mm,
and causing all sorts of different events to happen in the world. And then you've got the Aedra, the nine divines or the eight divines, depending on the time of the game, um, which are much more kind of passive. Like they can give blessings, they can sometimes interact, but they're mostly kind of bigger, passive, like hands-off forces in the world,
Mm.
that that might work through more through like inspiration and that sort of thing instead of directly manipulating events like the Daedra try to do. So even within a world, you can have two different sets of gods that do very different things, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, and one thing you do, I don't know, you can have it in a like in Pillars or something like that, but I don't know how much you've met that yet in Gardens of the Moon. If I remember right, maybe not so much yet, but maybe among the soldiers, because in Malazan many people are either secular, agnostic, or true doubters that there exist gods
Hmm.
at all. They think it's just a hoax pokes, like people can think on Earth as well, and so totally okay to think that. And but in a video game, I suppose that's more difficult to illustrate or portray. If I don't know, because mostly in video games people are believers. I suppose the
Right.
games I've played, at least.
Yeah, I guess it depends on like how the game like builds out the pantheon.
Mm.
Like when I think of say the Witcher games,
Mm.
I now that I think about it, like I'm sure I think there are gods or there is some kind of pantheon that people pray to, but there's not a lot of like interaction there. I mean, there are different religions that show up for sure in the games and in that world,
Mm.
but you don't have a lot of this divine interaction and things like that,
Mm.
because there's so much other different magic and powerful beings and stuff in that world, versus something like Malazan or Pillars, where the gods are a major part of that story in that world. Um, but yeah, like when you have games like Pillars or Skyrim, um, because the gods are a big part of that world and the lore of that world, I don't think you end up having a lot of instances where people are like, I don't believe in the gods.
Mm.
And I think it's also one of these things where, um, if the gods are able to physically interact with people and be in the world, it can be really hard to not believe in them because there's physical proof of them, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
if you can talk to them, I guess then what you would say is like, I don't believe that that thing is a god. I think
Mm.
they're just some, I don't know, powerful being. But
Mm.
that gets into a whole other philosophical debate.
Yeah.
Um,
But I think it could be possible, and maybe there are some examples. I don't know. I haven't played those games yet. But a completely different game, but still a CRPG, is the Disco Elysium. And if we watched this, probably you
right.
know about these games. It has nothing to do with the fantasy, but about philosophy and
Hmm.
yeah, philosophy and political doctrines and so on and so forth. And there they, of course, express doubt. And so on. So I suppose it could be possible to do it in a CRPG, but in a fantasy CRPG, but probably a very creative team would like to, take that task to try to do that. It would be
Hmm.
fun.
Yeah,
See.
it'd be interesting.
Because like in Baldur's Gate, the characters, I mean, you don't need to play as a believer. You can play as a druid or something, and then you can
Right.
role play as that. But then you can play as, someone who are totally unholy in their actions.
Yeah, and in that case, it's not that your character doesn't believe that the gods exist; they just choose not to interact with them. And I
Mm.
guess that's kind of the big difference. Is like, you know, because in that kind of world, it's kind of impossible to say the gods don't exist. But you can say like, oh, I know they exist. I just don't like them, or I don't care to interact with them. Like,
Mm.
I'm gonna do my thing and just ignore them completely.
Mm.
And I think that's something that's really possible to do in these games like Pillars or like in Baldur's Gate 3. Like you can just choose to not interact with all of that.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, and of course, depending on who you are, who you are as a person playing the games, see different things. Also, when you read a book, you see different things. So my lens is maybe different from yours or any other person. We can
Sure.
see different things in the books. So I think that's still very interesting to think about that. And I think this relates a little bit to immersion, because if we think of lore in terms of geography, for example, you can actually see the nature in a video game. I mean,
Yeah.
visually, but you imagine it in a book. If it's a really good author, he can or she can probably describe it for you as well, of course.
Yeah. Mhm.
So there's a lot to think about. But one thing is, I think Pillars is the closest to if you haven't played Pillars of Eternity, try to do that. I think it's great,
It's a great game.
especially if you read Malazan, and it comes very close to Malazan, at least in a few ways, I think.
I can definitely see it. I've played Pillars 1 and 2, and I know that story really well. I haven't played Avowed yet. And while I'm just starting to read Malazan, I can already see like how you can draw that conclusion, and I can see a lot of similarities between
There
them.
is another game I haven't played, but many talk about that game. It's Tyranny.
Right. I haven't
Have you
played that
played
either.
that? Have you?
No, I haven't, but I've heard a lot of good things about it.
Yeah, so that is some perspectives on storytelling. Have we missed something or something more? We can talk about this for hours, I think. So that would
Probably.
be no problem, and it's very, very fun to do that. But we have been covering very spontaneous a few themes here. It's ways of telling a story in a game and immersion, and we have talked about world building and the perspectives of the character, if it's one character or many characters, and we talked about Pantheon and a little bit about geography. So we have covered a lot of things during this hour. Do you think we have missed something important?
I don't think so. We did cover a whole lot of different things. Yeah, I think that was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on the channel and to have this discussion.
Yeah, thank you for being here, and I hope we can continue in this or another form, of course, off screen. And you who are watching this, if you have ideas on topics for the channel, or if you have perspectives on this discussion, please write it in the comments below or at the community page on YouTube or on Twitter, or actually now on Facebook as well. So happy for everyone who is still here. I hope you have enjoyed it. We have done it a lot. So until next time, have a great day, and see you tomorrow, actually, with a new video from me here. Bye.